So, welcome everybody, applicants, invited guests. I'll call this meeting to order. It's a little bit late, 5:03, I believe. So, would you like to call the roll?
John Miller,
Here.
Carol Perez,
Here.
Vlad Domitrescu,
Here.
Chris Cabezas,
Here.
Peter Dwyer is absent, Jim Chard.
Here. I think everybody knows that Ezra resigned to be on the housing board.
I did not know that.
And I don't know if they've replaced him yet or not, but we will be the mighty five, I guess. Minutes. I called up Diane Miller today and complimented her on those exhaustive.
Did we want to approve the agenda first? I'm not sure.
I guess we could.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
No problem.
Motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Who seconded
Carol.
and who motioned? Chris. Thank you.
All right, minutes? Okay.
Excellent.
What I was starting to say is these minutes were just amazing. And the amount of detail and accuracy and effort that went into those. I had to call Diane and compliment her, and I assume you helped a little bit too. But no?
No, I
Give
did not.
Diane all the credit?
All the
Okay.
credit.
So having said that, would somebody like to make a motion to approve said minutes?
All three of them?
Well, let's see if we can do all three, yeah. You want to make the motion, Glenn?
Motion to approve all three minutes.
Carol, do you want a second again?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So now we get to swear in the public, including George.
All right.
Anybody who wishes to speak, please stand up.
By the authority vested in me as the notary of the state of Florida, do you swear to affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
All right. This is a point that anyone can come up and speak their mind about any issues that they think are pertinent to historic preservation. Can I encourage at least one person to come up? All right. I guess that is it for that. So now we move on to any presentations. Ms. Hoyland?
We have none.
All right. Therefore, we go into our quasi-judicial issues, and let me read the introduction on that. This hearing shall be conducted in accordance with the City of Delray Beach quasi-judicial rules. The applicant and the city shall be permitted to present their case. The public shall be allowed to speak for 3 minutes each, or a maximum of 6 minutes if the person represents an organization or a group of people who are present but agree not to speak. The commission or the board, members, staff, and the applicant may be allowed to cross-examine a witness. The city or the applicant may be allowed to offer rebuttal. The decision to approve or deny an application or appeal may not legally be made upon personal views as to whether a project is a good project or not, nor may a decision be based on the numbers of citizens who support or oppose a particular project. The law requires that all decisions must be made on the basis of whether the project meets the requirements of law, the comprehensive plan, and the land development regulations. So I guess we therefore need to enter into the record.
File number 2025
File
184. It's an ad valorem tax exemption for 108 North Swinton Avenue. And the property owner, Ms. Tracy Pickett, is here and will present now.
While she's walking up, do you want to see if there are any ex parte communications from the board?
No.
Oh, boy.
Ex parte?
No.
I've spoken to
the applicant way in the past when this project was just getting
Yeah.
started, but that was it.
No.
None.
Okay, so I guess, do I begin?
You can
Please.
begin.
Okay, so this.
You might introduce yourself.
Oh, yeah, Tracy Pickett, the owner. So this was 108 Swinton when I purchased it, but actually it looks much better than it really looked in this photo. Anyway, I mean, you can't really see in this photo, but there's 3 windows in the front. Okay, and this is the side, the porch.
And you can control it there too with.
No,
the
I'm
mouse.
fine, I'm
Okay.
fine. This is from the south side, so that's what the front porch looked like.
Mm-hmm.
Just the front part of it.
So you actually have.
Oh, okay, because it's switched down, okay. Oh, okay. Oh, here, okay, perfect. So this is immediately behind the front porch, and you can see there's 2 windows. They were the existing windows that were on the house on the south side. This is the lovely north side. Those were not my paint colors. They were there when I bought the house. There's the 2 windows, the fireplace, the 3 windows, and the next set of windows are the kitchen windows. That's the kitchen window. And then here is, it's like a double wide trailer sort of thing going on there with some more paint splotches. So that was the back of the house. And this is it from the alley, so the west side, looking at it, what the back looked like. So we went through the construction process, and what ended up happening, well, 2 things. First of all, there was termite damage, but they were 24-inch studs, from the center, so we had to reinforce every single 2x4 with a 2x6. So you can kind of see that. As well as with the trusses, we also had to reinforce those. Then, as a result of doing, this is just, of course, the new part of the house looking into the old part of the house. But as a result of all of the reinforcement that we had to do and the excessive weight, of course, the foundation wasn't able to sustain that weight. So I think it's probably standard and common practice. We had to pour new footings throughout the existing part of the house. So that would kind of be the major things that had to occur on the interior of the house before we could start working on the outside. And then anyway, here is what it looks like now. As you can see, we opened up the porch to look like what it originally looked like before they boxed it in. I did keep every single window. The windows in the front are the same size as the original windows. And as you look around the rest of the house, that window you couldn't see because obviously there was the enclosure done, but the door is the same size as well as the window. Here on this side too, if you look at the original photo of the south side of the house, there was a single window and 2 double windows. Right beyond that is the piece which separates the old construction from the new construction, juts out a couple inches on there, and that's the new addition towards the back of it. We did keep, I don't know what they're called, what are those? The ones near the top, the soffits that kind of look to, oh, you got one up there. We kept those. I don't know what the name of it is, the architectural name of it. As well, this is the side view of the house now to the north. And again, kept all of the windows, the 2 on either side of the fireplace. I see that. And then there, you can't see them in this photo, but then there's the 3 single windows. The only thing that I took away from the north, east, and west side were the 2 short windows which were the original kitchen. And I put 2 entrances. One is to the kitchen, one is to the cabana bath. And then right after the light that's there, you can kind of see prior to the French doors, that's where the old house ended and the new house began. And then, of course, what we kind of did to try and make the old part look a little different is we put shed dormers up on the top, and there's some too as well. This is the back of the house. Of course, this is a new addition, but you're more concerned with what the front looks like. I think that's probably about it. So it's all wood. All the siding's wood, cedar on the old part, new part. We could do whatever we wanted. I see people looking in all different directions. Oh my God. Like, what are you looking at up there? No, I guess. Anyway, okay, just questions or do you guys, you go. Okay,
Go.
great, perfect.
For the record, Michelle Hewitt, historic planner, and this is for an ad valorem tax exemption at 108 North Swinton Avenue. Here we have the subject property outlined in blue on this aerial. I'm going to go over some brief background of the property. Okay. The subject property consists of the south 15.7 feet of lot 14 and the north 48.8 feet of lot 15. It's located within the locally and nationally designated Old School Square Historic District and contains a contributing one-story bungalow-style structure constructed in 1925.
Is that the building?
Lightning, probably. Lightning.
It could be. Fingers crossed.
I don't think so.
They redid the roof a couple years ago. So.
Oh, okay.
okay.
Sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Michelle. I just was like,
concerned
we
too.
should
I'm
probably
concerned
leave
too,
if
yeah,
it's
yeah.
the building. Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, so here we have the original aerial of the property. This is prior to improvements on the screen here. You can see the building as it existed previously. And then here is the new aerial of the property with those additions. You can see the rear additions, pergola, pool, redone landscaping, and new hardscaping. So just going over the project that came before the board, and that's here for the ad valorem tax exemption. It was for a new addition and exterior modifications to restore the original porch on the front facade of the existing structure, a new 1,383 square foot addition, along with a 497 square foot garage to the west, rear side of the existing structure, removal of the 342 square foot existing rear porch shed from the west corner of the existing structure, construction of a new trellis on the north side of the property, construction of a new swimming pool, decking, and enclosure wall, and replacement of existing ribbon strip driveway with a paper brick ribbon strip driveway, construction of a new brick ribbon drive walkway, and construction of a new paper brick rear driveway adjacent to the approved garage. So here on the screen is the east or front elevation. This faces North Swinton Avenue of the structure prior to improvements, where you can see that enclosed front porch there on the left where the blue door is located. And then here is the front of the property during construction, where you can see the porch being unveiled during construction, and some of the siding and painting that's being done. And here is it today with the trellis feature on the right, the new paper bricks, and that restored front porch there, railings. Another angle here of the finished front elevation. This is the side or north elevation of the structure prior to the modifications. And this is the side / north elevation. You can see the existing structure on the left, that new pool, the wall, and the addition there on the right, along with those new dormers that the homeowner mentioned. This is the south elevation further towards the back, and this is, or towards the front, and this is the south elevation with that porch during construction being restored. And then here it is today, a little hidden behind the landscaping, but you can see that opened porch there, and the addition a little bit on the left. This is the west / rear elevation. This is the side that accommodated the new addition, garage, and driveway. And here is that addition here garage, and driveway. The space is the alley. So this is the survey prior to improvements with the subject property highlighted in blue and the property line in red. This is the approved site plan. The blue is the existing or original structure, and then the red is the addition that happened to the rear. There's the pool there on the north side, the trellis, ribbon strip driveway, and the rear driveway. Looking at elevations, this on the top is the existing and the bottom is the approved, where you can see the red are all of the new elements that were added, including the restored porch. And then after that got approved, there was there was siding that came through, those scalloped architectural details on the roof there, on the gable there, and some new smaller structural columns for the trellis that came before the board and were also approved. That's reflected in the final project. Here again on the top is the north or side of the structure, with the blue being the existing or original structure, and then the red are all of the new elements. And then the yellow there, that small modification that came before the board after the approval. This is the south side, again blue original structure, and then red the addition. You can see the expanse of the addition, those dormers, and that porch as well. And then the item that came before the board after for that gable. And then this is the rear. This is again where the primary facade where the addition is located, with the garage and driveway. And then this is the rendering that was approved for the front. And the proposed, so you can see the final execution being nearly the same as what was on the rendering there. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. Any comments from the public?
George Long, the public, 46 North Swinton. I watched this house being rebuilt, and you haven't seen anything until you've actually did what I did and kind of peeked under the house and took pictures of all the form work and stuff, and it was amazing what if you're looking at the sticks and the works inside, there's a lot that went on underneath that, incredible amount. And one of my four careers, actually, by some strange coincidences, a series of them, I ended up doing layout and commercial construction, footers and column pads and things like that for big hotels and shopping centers and things like that. It's kind of weird how I got there and got into even construction management. I fooled a lot of people. But anyway, when I looked under there, I knew a little bit what I was looking at, and it was incredible. And also, it looks good, right? Thank you. This is pretty obvious, but in case there was something in the water, I wanted to make sure that you guys are cool on this.
I guess you approve it. Is that safe to assume, George? Anybody else from the public?
Kathy Appleton, 1127 Nassau Street. I want to support this because I think it's one of our outstanding examples of restoration and preservation in the city, which I think we're losing rapidly. And and over the years, I lived in Nassau Park in 1993, and we in the city have, as you all know, have lost a lot of homes. And so this is a credit to the owner who went to the extent that she did to restore and to preserve this property. So I fully support the tax abatement. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Any rebuttal by the applicant to the presentation by staff? Okay, all right. And by staff, any rebuttal?
None from staff.
Okay, let's take it to the The board. Anybody want to start off?
I can start. It's just a great project. It really retains that historic character and scale, and it's done very well. It's hitting all the marks that we look for, so I'm full support of this.
Yeah, I don't know what the previous owner thought that paint was going to do. But, I mean, I had an opportunity to see this as it was going on, and it resembled an open-air pavilion for a lot of the time when it was being reconstructed, and they really did a great job. It was nice that it was kind of located near the front of the property so that so much could be done in the back. And when we're over at the Historical Society looking across the street, there's so many people that comment on it. Anybody who's walking around and sees it. So, you know, hopefully somebody will take on the property next door at some point. But I'm in wholehearted support of this one.
Me too. And also got an award. We have to remember that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And rightfully so.
Rightfully so.
Yeah. It's,
Carol?
It's
Yep, great job. I'm your neighbor. I'm probably 2 doors down from you at 132 North Swinton, and we watched the construction going up, and great job.
The pink house?
Purple.
Purple.
AGT land.
I obviously agree with the sentiments expressed. I think it was one of the best shows in town for weeks driving by. A little bit of competition from the Sunday Village, but really amazing effort. Thank you. So I guess we should make a motion.
Yep, I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval to the City Commission of the of the historic property ad valorem tax exemption application 2025-184 for improvements to the property at 108 North Swinton Avenue, Old School Square Historic District, by finding that the request and approval thereof is consistent with the comprehensive plan and meets the criteria set forth in the land development regulations.
Second?
Call the roll.
John Miller,
Yes.
Carol Perez,
Yes.
Vlad Domitrescu,
yes.
Chris Cabezas,
Yes.
Peter Dwyer.
Not here.
Oh, absent. Sorry. Jim Chard.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hello again, Michelle Hoyland for the record. I'd like to enter the file 2025-176 into the record. This is a COA for 49 Palm Square. You recall you saw this last month and continued requesting additional information. The applicant's agent, Mr. Roger Cope, is here and will make a presentation.
Is he here?
Oh, is here.
There he is.
For the record, Roger Cope, 701 Southeast 1st Street, National Marina Historic District. No real presentation other than...
Sorry to interrupt you, Roger. Just, were there any ex parte communications from the board?
None.
None.
Nope.
No.
None.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So
Sorry about that.
the update from what occurred last month in the presentation before you and today is that we invited staff out to the property to allow them full access to see every square inch of the house, all, you know, front, back, sides, up close, you know, rather than from a distance. Not that we kept them from a distance, but so we all met on site, and then let them do their thing, and they so they have made some observations and opinions that I'm sure they're going to share with you when they give their presentation. But so the perhaps the issue is how much of the house was recited, and it's impossible to say how much or how little. It's almost impossible to tell, in my opinion, what has been replaced because it's so professionally done, perhaps, and so the craftsmanship is almost museum quality. So other than we found a few little pinholes of attachments here and there that we're going to have the filled and remedied. But the only other thing that's come to light over the past month is the fact that, and I'm certainly not an expert on it, but the National Park Service seems to have softened on their opinion of the use of man-made product. I think it's kind of recognized that they've accepted it to a certain degree on non-contributing structures and where not visible from a public right-of-way. But while we were all out at the site, we pointed out, it was very easy to point out where all the wood on the house that was original, and meaning the renovation of 15 years ago, the entire front porch, all the brown things that you see in this little image right here is obviously real wood. All the heavy timber brackets, a lot of which is been painted white. It's all wood. The shutters are wood. The trim around all the windows and doors are wood. The jambs are wood. The sills are wood. It's just the siding. Obviously, that's the question mark. And so, relying on the National Park Service's adaptation of the allowance for an applicant to, in a regional sense, use a product that's going to withstand the test of time, we're going to, rely on that. And so I'm sure staff has a much more in-depth presentation on that. But other than that, we're looking for an approval so we can move on. We've got to get code enforcement satisfied. The clock is still running and ticking on a daily fine basis. And so, we're just here to answer any other questions that you might have.
Could you address the NOA issue?
NOA issue, is more than likely going to be available to the public by the time we get this approval and file for permit on the reciting.
No change from the last time.
Other than another month closer to a new NOA. And that even begs the question.
Honestly, I think it's going to be within building's hands at that point anyway. That's going to be a later issue.
My limited experience, thank you very much. My limited experience with that is the NOA on any siding, even real wood siding, is when it's applied to a concrete block substrate, because you can't put it directly on the concrete block. You have to fur it, and then so it's the NOA is about the method of attachment and the resistance of that attachment to a 200-mile-an-hour wind occurrence. So I'm not even. We have a wood frame structure here, so I'm not even 100% sure that the NOA identifies anything other than attachment to concrete block. So, in other words, I don't know that it's totally pertinent to the attachment to a wood stud frame building, which has a layer of plywood on it, no furring involved, and when you apply any piece of siding, whether it's wood or man-made, to a plywood wall, you don't have to worry about hitting this and hitting that. You're always going right into the plywood, the substrate. So I'm not even positive we need an NOA on it, but we're going to get it when they make it available, and it is a building department issue. We'll
Okay.
try to take it one step at a time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Michelle Hoyland, Principal Planner with the Development Services Department. It doesn't want to let the thing on the bottom show. You see that? I'm just going to go to this. Okay. Sorry about that. So this property for 2025-176 is 49 Palm Square, located on the east side of Palm Square, south of Atlantic Avenue and north of Southeast First Street. This is the current existing structure. It's a single-family home, and it has a detached carport, or like a breezeway attached carport on the north side. The structure had gone through a series of improvements over the last decade that included a vertical elevation of the structure to meet the finished floor elevation requirements, plus renovation, which was removal of some of the existing siding, adding on additional vertical elements such as, increase in height on the walls, the roof, adding the transom windows. That was all completed and approved by the board in around 2015. And we do have a picture, which I'll show you a little bit later, but I want to address one thing so we can kind of shelf that idea for a moment, and then we can focus on the requirements from the LDRs and the Secretary of the Interior standards. The question about an NOA. So we checked in with the building department. This is a complete replacement. So all siding on this structure was completely replaced from front to back. This was done without a permit, is subject to code enforcement violations. But the building department said that they can either provide an NOA or a letter from a signed licensed professional indicating that the installed material meets the Florida Building Code. One or the other is required. So there is an option there, allowing some flexibility, basically in order to comply with the Engineering and Florida Building Code requirements for hurricane wind load. That's in your staff report. If we go back though and start with the review about the historic integrity. So whenever a project is, coming through the process to do a siding repair, the standards, Secretary of the Interior standards, are very clear in what the recommended guidance is. When an entire siding of an entire structure comes off of a building, it has to come before the board for your review. And that is to ensure that we have the same profile, that the same texture of that wood siding is met, that the carefulest methods are taken, and if there's any instance where portions can be retained rather than removed just because, say, they're removing 50% of it. Some contractors might say take it all off and start over. That is not the recommended guidance from the Secretary of the Interior standards. The recommended guidance is to patch in. While the availability of the wood might be slightly different, wood is not a material that we're seeing not available. An asbestos roof shingle is something that's not going to be available, or something that's not going to be made. So that's where this alternative or substitute material question comes in. So we did walk the site. What we noticed, and I have no close-up pictures of what was out there before, but this material, this AZEC, looks nice, feels nice. We assume it has a similar profile, but it has the appearance of wood that has been planed. So there is no wood grain texture on the exterior of this structure. You can see here there's brush strokes from the paint. There's the exposed pieces at the joints here that probably should have some kind of treatment cap, something. There were a few photos we had where we could already see water wicking in. Even though this is a more sustainable material, that doesn't mean that that material won't degrade or have its own deterioration issues over time. So here you can see where it intersects natural wood material. So it's very nice looking, but what the board has to consider, and we did review the preservation brief number 16, and we have provided information on that for you, is that preservation brief goes hand in hand with the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, which clearly state replacing a deteriorated wood feature or wood siding on a primary or other highly visible elevation with a composite substitute material is not recommended. So we've went and also photographed other locations what wood siding would have looked like, original wood siding. Some of these pictures are structures, within our historic districts. These two are from Sunday Village. We were out there yesterday where they painstakingly removed all of the siding off of these buildings, put it to the side, and then repaired the building and put the siding back on. So this is what has been required of other owners in other historic districts for contributing structures. And this is where you can see there's an authenticity to that original material. This is a reminder of what happened with this house when the renovation happened. So this, you can see the original siding was retained in place, and what's new, that raw open area on top, is what was added. So that's where some of the new siding, this is where the new siding was used to match in with the profile of what was existing. So it is all of that that's been removed. The Secretary of the Interior, the City of Delray Beach Design Guidelines, they all provide guidance to applicants not to remove all of your siding and replace it, much less replace it with a synthetic material. The preservation brief, and we can kind of come back and forth to these, it's very specific. When you review this, it's a case-by-case basis that needs to be analyzed. But there's criteria. It's not really the intent to take off the original material and come back with substitute material on the entirety of a structure. The intent is that you might have features or sections that need to be replaced. And how hard would it be to replace wood on a front facade? Say you took off 50% of the wood and match that wood with a synthetic or alternative material. That's what the intent of Preservation Brief 16 says. So, the use of this material isn't necessarily where we're saying it's, can't be done, but the board is going to have to determine, because this will be something that other applicants will look for. We have an immense amount of pressure from design professionals and contractors pressing to use substitute material, not understanding what the intent of the guidelines are. So here you see that it's, the criteria is whether historic or substitute material is used, there's a point where the amount of replacement can become excessive and the building's historic integrity is diminished to an unacceptable degree regardless of the material used. That is a loss of authenticity and physical features and characteristics closely associated with the historic significance. Now, if we were talking about all the porch columns had to be taken down and they wanted to put AZEC up, to me, that's how I see this preservation brief providing that guidance, where the board can make a determination that there's a similar profile to the original wood of porch columns or a texture or whatever, rather than saying, take all the siding off. We aren't really certain why all the siding was taken off. It had existed in place for almost 90 years when it was renovated in 2015, and here we are in 2025. What happened in 10 years' time? Did it degrade to such a point where it was all rotten? In that case, really should have been going back with wood. So here's where I mentioned, availability of materials. This is taken from the preservation brief. The picture on the left has a structure with authentic wood siding on one side of the building, and around the corner is synthetic. It's very difficult. It's getting better. I'm not saying it's not available, but what's off the shelf isn't necessarily going to match the exact profile of wood that existed. So you can see authentic versus synthetic in this picture. On the right, you can see asbestos cement roofing shingles just aren't made anymore. So if a structure had that, you have to look for an alternative material. These are both synthetic materials here. And the point of this is that, there is a wood grain that's available if the material's ordered that way, or it can be planed. So if the house had planed siding, then plain siding is what should be used. We don't have documentation of that that I can find in my records. This is an example of a structure that has both wood and synthetic siding on the same elevation where pieces were patched in. You can't even tell. So there are instances where it can be done. Milling a synthetic material is something that's a little bit harder to do. It's going to kind of price the customer out if you can't buy the size you need off the shelf. But you certainly can do that approach. Conservation, rehabilitation, preservation, these are all essentially the same approaches. And the fact that we have environmental factors here, being close to the water and a flood-prone area, those are things you could consider as well. But in that instance, you might consider replacing the bottom quarter rather than the whole structure. So here's the guidance that came from the preservation brief. When the board is making this consideration, will the significance or visibility of the historic feature require a very precise match? Is the entire feature being replaced or just a component of it? Are pre-existing conditions contributing to the failure of the existing material, and if so, how is that going to be addressed? Is the need for replacement due to inherent deficiencies of the original material, and will the material need to resist any environmental hazards such as flooding or fire? Well, we really don't have the context clues for what was happening with the material that was out there, but there really needs to be a compelling reason for the board to make a determination that an entire historic structure should have its siding removed because an owner wants to. You know, if there was documentation, photographs, a contractor's estimate or an architect's assessment of the condition of what was going on, that, you know, obviously is the compelling evidence that you need to make a determination. So we're really trying to make sure you have all of the information provided so that you're making a decision that doesn't later come back and become something that is, you know, not that we do precedents, but could be an example for someone else to want to do something similar. So these are your 10 Secretary of the Interior standards. These are analyzed in the staff report. We've identified, you know, the problem, the ones that could be met or not met. Obviously, standard 2 and 5 are basic. Almost every application looks at this, whether the character of the property is being preserved, whether distinctive features or craftsmanship techniques are being preserved, whether deteriorated features are being repaired rather than replaced. In this instance, they were all replaced, so you have to decide whether or not it meets standard 6. And then standard 9 is ensuring that historic materials aren't destroyed that characterize the property. So these are things that, these are the requirements the board has to check off and decide on. And then your visual compatibility standards, relationship of materials, texture, and color is compatible and predominant with the historic district and the structures, the historic buildings in the district. So wood frame buildings with wood siding, is this going to remain compatible with that? So that really, you know, is the bulk of it, but I also want the board to remember and consider that decisions that are made now may seem like a compromise in trying to help somebody come into compliance or resolve an issue, but in 5 to 10 years from now, when the next historic resource survey is done, where the consultant comes through and assesses our districts, are they going to be looking at a structure saying, you know, that structure appears to have had a whole siding replacement, it's really affected its historic integrity? We recommend declassifying it to a non-contributor. So those are some of the things we have to think through because that does happen. So here's your findings. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Any public comment? Would really like to hear from the public on this one. This is a tough one.
George Long, 46 North Swinton. This is coming from somebody that never failed a student. So take it from there. Wow, that's complicated. Is there a way of leaving it there but making a record that you are aware there's an error and that cannot be used as a precedent-setting example. That's all I have to contribute, which isn't much.
Thank you, sir.
I just hate to tear it down. No, that's all.
Just to comment on that, I would say that none of what you guys do up here is actually precedent setting. You're supposed to look at the property as is and the house and their circumstances, and then apply the land development regulations and the design guidelines to it.
So would the applicant care to rebut?
If you, I think we'd like to go on record. We're happy to be declassified as non-contributing, if that means we can get an approval from you tonight to move forward. The re-siding was, like, started a year ago or so. From testimony of my owner, the real wood was deteriorating at such a rapid rate that it just required attention. And he takes immaculate care of the property, and it kind of went from there. So other than that, if you want, I don't know what else to say to you. If you want us to remain contributing, but if you want us to strip the whole facade of the front of the house maybe and go back to real wood, if you're going to deny us, please give us explicit direction on how to remedy it.
Thank you. Michelle?
So it doesn't really work that way, that if you approve the siding, that they get declassified as an effect of that tonight. This is something that would be in the future. But the things that happen when a property is declassified, I haven't searched this one up and looked, but if they have a tax exemption, that they have to repay their tax exemption upon declassification. It's a very complicated process, because in effect of something that's happened from a renovation or it's not really an instance where you're sitting here saying, oh, let me go replace all my siding so that the board will declassify me. It doesn't really work that way, but there's other processes that would come into effect should that happen down the road upon a resurvey. But I did hear Mr. Cope offer wood on the front, and that's definitely something that the board could consider. That would be moving them closer to compliance. Something that I don't think we would prefer to see the whole structure be in compliance, but that's obviously up to the board to make that decision.
Thank you. Let's bring it to the board. Carol, do you want to start?
No.
Vlad?
Okay. Roger, can I ask you a question? Roger? How you doing? I'm trying, it's not an easy one, so I'm trying to find the rationale to hopefully make everybody happy. There's a photo of under construction, one photo we have in the report, and it showed like portion of the siding in place, and then the extended addition, higher roofs and all that, not yet sided, call it that way, or covered. And okay, that's the one. That is what you remember. This you've seen that, you were there present. No, the reason I'm asking is because is it that? Am I really that? I can hear myself, but okay. It's interesting because the building looks like it had no cover in the corner. There's no trim in the corners of this. Was a very modern type of siding solution there with a continuous, almost like usually that is done with a mithering solution, not butting one against the other when it's right. I mean, would you do that? So I'm kind of interested in why was this? And where I'm going at is that the design at the end was approved and maintained the house as an historic house, even though it's actually a very modern design. Well, it is. I mean, it's not a traditional. The look of the facades and all that was, I think, your fault, call it that way. But you introduce a certain different proportions, different look, the way that the gable, in some cases, the siding continues in the gable, that's not a traditional detail. What's done is a more abstract sort of design, in my opinion, as an architect. You don't see it that way. That wasn't your intention.
No.
That wasn't your intention. It's actually, to me, it's a modernized version of a traditional building. It's not how it had been built initially. Has a lot of beautiful details. This is nothing wrong. It's just that I'm not criticizing the design. That was interesting to me, that was approved. And if I would be from a very purist historic point of view, I'll have kind of objections to certain things, you know? But it was approved. And it was fine. And everybody liked it, I assume, right? The result of that. Is it possible that we, within that realm, we agree that the building, that's how we call it, it was actually looked much of a newer sort of type of design. Didn't remain as a traditional old Florida vernacular.
But it was approved. We can't go back.
So
No,
Vlad,
yeah, but my point is that when it was approved, that opened the door to certain modifications of the design and of the house.
So I think what you're asking me,
Okay, thank you.
and listen, your insights are that of an architect. So thank you very much. But and none of you were here 15 years ago when this went before the board at that time. But this was a resto mod, to use a car term, and I hate to do that, but this wasn't a pure restoration. The client sought to raise the entire roof system 2 feet. Fairly controversial, and so just we got that approved, and you can imagine that changes the massing, that changes proportion, that allowed the opportunity for transoms over windows that would otherwise never have them had we not raised the roof. I think you can see that the corners on the original were always mitered.
Yeah.
They're still mitered. I don't think it's an opinion. It wasn't a wood grain finish back then. It had 15 layers of paint on it, perhaps. I don't know.
Right.
And so it's relatively smooth skinned now, and yes, I would never have brushed the house. I would have sprayed it, so you can see brush strokes in the paint. But and the porches, you mentioned the porch.
Right.
We came back more than once to ask for revisions to the original conception, and we enclosed the rear porch. And expanded it. We enclosed the front porch.
Right.
We added a carport to the side.
Right.
We did. This wasn't a pure restoration. I think is your point.
Yeah, that's
it's
my
It was a modification / restoration.
Yeah, and my point is that maybe Michelle has a little leeway because of this change of rules. This is not a house that was just restored to be a perfect replica of a traditional construction. It has a lot of very modern, very unusual details,
So
very
first,
unexpected.
For sure.
You
And
know.
there's no rule change. So the rules are what they are. The board made a determination in 2015.
Right.
One year before I started, I
Right.
was a bit surprised by it. I remember meeting with Roger.
Right.
But it's what they did, right?
There's nothing wrong
So
per se with that.
this is not mitered, though. These are butt joints.
Right, that's weird.
That is not what we saw in the pictures we have. This was 2015. We weren't getting PDF digital JPEGs, so they're photocopies of pictures. But from what we can see is there was a grain that had been painted out so many times. So I don't know if that answers any of your questions, but we're not going back, essentially. I understand that's part of your consideration. But what we're moving forward with is what does the board want to do in order to move this along?
Well, personally, I'm not against it, what happened. I'm trying to find an argument why it would make it easier for everybody to accept those changes for once. I mean, obviously, not creating a precedent that will be from now on, like everybody's gonna say, see, you've done, therefore approve, I'm doing vinyl now. I'm changing it to vinyl,
Right. These are the guidelines and rules that are used. There's,
Well, I'm gonna make my own decision. I actually support it, so.
Can we go to Chris? Roger?
Roger, would you like to say something?
If I can address the mitering just for 1 second. I did a house a few years after this where they make an aluminum corner piece to hide or to if I had my druthers, I would have included that white aluminum corner guard on every one of these corners, which it's a good maintenance addition, and I'm happy to add it to these corners if the way that they did it is of issue. Happy to add those corners, which you wouldn't be able to distinguish. It would just make it super clean and hide the end of one of the boards. That's all it would do. But that's done in some historic homes.
No, I understand. I was trying to find a way that I feel better about approving.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. It seems like the client did many things wrong, right? They know the historic process. Should we assume that he knew that this was going to come back like this, and that he was doing this work to try to get this passed after the fact, or the contractor knew that they needed to get the permits and the historic preservation? I don't know what happened there.
You don't need to assume anything about how it got here. Just if it came to you, this is like you're looking at it for the first time. If this came to you and they asked for that approval, would you give it?
So we don't look at it being after the fact?
No, you really should treat it the same as any other request.
Oh, really?
You want to treat it like this came to you, and they asked you, can I put this siding on? So.
Is that accurate? Yeah.
Well, Kelly's right. We're giving you the backstory because it is a subject of a code enforcement violation and it's been done, but it's not supposed to factor into your decision making and that you feel bad for the applicant, because your decision making based on quasi-judicial rules is not whether or not you like a project or you don't like a project. It has to be based on the requirements of the LDRs. So in this case, if this were coming to you as a brand new application, what would you be doing if it hadn't been done? The fact that it's been done is really ancillary. That's the owner's issue, not yours.
Yeah, and it shouldn't factor in on either side. You shouldn't factor it in as you feel bad, and you shouldn't factor it in as you feel like they should be punished for doing something without approval. Code enforcement handles that portion of it, whether, like what circumstances led them to that, and, if there are fines or whatever they need to do, But you guys handle it as if, does this request fit the land development regulations and the design guidelines and the,
Okay, got it. Well, it would have been nice for the applicant himself, the owner, to come in, or the contractor to come in to explain what happened. I think that would have been more helpful, but they're not here, so we have to make some decisions based on very limited information. I'm not against the use of synthetic material. I think it makes sense. I actually think the house looks great and looks like they do a good job to maintain it. I don't like the way they're going about this, You know, the interior standards do say it needs to be wood, or it's recommended that it's wood. But it's, you know, that's just a recommendation, and it was also noted that the use of synthetic materials is now being more widely accepted. Something to consider is to take off the siding in the front to put wood. Is that going to damage the house at all? Is it, you know, just more effort and using of resources that is just not really needed for the overall effect, you know, of the historic quality of this house? I don't know if the siding itself is the factor that would take this from conforming to non-conforming. I don't know if we could know that. So even though I don't like how this went forward, and you know, I don't want to set this as a precedent for people to come back after the fact. I think I'm leaning towards supporting it because it just makes, you know, this synthetic material makes sense, as it seems like it's changing, and, you know, from, you know, especially here in Florida by the water. So I'd like to hear what other board members think, but that's what I'm leaning towards.
Carol, are you ready yet?
Sure. Yeah, so you're saying basically, Roger, that the compelling reason was the deterioration of all the wood siding that was there.
Yes.
And you can put a little finish on the ends to make it look more like a dovetail on the front. Is that what you're saying?
Not a dovetail, but a
Miter.
but a totally symmetrical miter. Like,
Yeah, I think, you know, it looks good from the pictures. I mean, the house looks immaculate and it looks fantastic. I really can't tell what the material is, and from the pictures, I have not driven by. I did not touch it. As staff said, the workmanship was good. I mean, I think you all agreed. Is that true? That the workmanship was well done?
We didn't see any issues with the workmanship, except the butt joints, yeah.
Yeah, in this case, I mean, I'm in favor. I'm leaning towards being in favor of this.
As is, or with the changes suggested by Roger?
If it'll make it look more historic, I mean, I don't even know what that looks like, but if it would make it look more historical, yeah, they can do that in the front. They wouldn't have to do it on all four sides.
John?
Are you talking about replacement or
No,
just
they
the
just added that.
edge detail?
I'm not an expert in that, but Roger, can you repeat like what that would be? The edge?
I would work with Michelle at whether or not, I don't think you would just want to add it to the front corners only. I think you would want to do it everywhere.
Okay.
If that's
Okay, yeah, I don't know.
requested.
I think, did somebody say what I thought? I don't know if somebody said that.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I didn't know if somebody asked what I thought.
You were asked, yes.
I would forego any corner treatment at this point to hide something.
Leave it.
Leave it the way it is. But the applicant did suggest replacement of the front to wood, which I think is a very fair compromise, getting it back to a more historic appearance. It was something that is in those Secretary of the Interior guidelines that specifically says about the primary facades having that treatment. So, yeah.
Can I say one more thing?
It wasn't something that was ever proffered at the time when we initially took it in, but being that it's being offered now, I feel like I get an opportunity to weigh in on that. And if we were writing a staff report about that, I would say that would be a very fair compromise to a mistake that was made.
Just one more thing. So and the shutters are all still wood, because you said that some of the facade is still wood, right? You have are the rafters wood and the shutters?
All the rafters, the outlookers, the entire porch enclosure, the
ceiling.
If it's brown in any of these photos, obviously it's real wood. Not obviously, but it is real wood. Mm-hmm. Even the white heavy, the trim around the windows and doors is wood, and I'm relatively sure the shutters are wood. Not that they're an issue right now. I can't recall, but I believe they're wood.
Thank you.
If the wood were replaced, Roger, could that be mitered? And on the front?
I mean,
Talk to the applicant for a second.
we would have to, yeah. I think we would have to miter it to make it.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. John?
Yeah, so as Chris said, there's a lot of things that could have been done differently here, but we're past that. I don't think the discussion of grain versus not really matters, because you could have a smooth finish wood. From the beginning, we don't know really what was there. So it could, and even if it did have grain on this version of it, it's still a, it's a man-made product. So were we to have this in front of us tonight as a new project, I don't think it would have support. So, I mean, that's kind of, you take it, boil it down, that's what Kelly said. I think, and I don't want to get into what might happen, but there's issues where if it is denied, there's recourses that the applicant has that goes above this board, and just leave it at that. And I think that there are options that they would have now if the applicant said, yeah, we're going to replace all the front, and we vote on that as a condition, that might have support. But as far as it is now, I don't think I could support it.
I think the idea of a compromise where the front would be replaced with natural materials is certainly something that I could support. And one of the things that I always try to say is that this board is flexible. It has guidelines. It does have LDRs. I understand that, but we do want to encourage more historical, not discourage others from undertaking the task. So I would definitely, if a condition were added to the COA application that a natural wood front replace what is there now, I could definitely support that. Michelle, you look questioning.
Okay. I mean, it's your decision.
It would be the same exact size as this siding, and it would look almost indistinguishable from what this is.
Wood is much easier to profile, the availability of it, but yes, it would have to match the profile. And it would remain as a planed appearance.
Okay, go ahead, I'm sorry.
We do see that. So just as an example, and I'm only going to go to a flat example, but we see this all the time. So when additions are coming before you and you have a single family house or whatever the building is, and they add an addition on, for instance, Miss Pickett, right? They can ask for synthetic material on the addition, and the board has approved that. Typically, we see hardy boards, cementitious siding. AZEC is becoming something a little more popular, but you might actually have an instance where you have to miter a corner of wood to synthetic. So it's not an unusual approach. We've seen it in other projects. So I don't see a problem with that.
I had one question for you, Michelle. Do we have a real-life example in Delray where we have had buildings declassified as contributing buildings?
The entirety of Southeast 7th Avenue, south of 3rd Street, except for the 3 properties right at the corner of 3rd and 7th. So everything between 3rd and 4th was declassified.
Well, that was removed
I
from the district.
Yeah, it was actually
That was
removed
removed
from the district.
at the request of the
owners.
residents.
Yeah,
Yes.
that
We
was
have
my
had
reason.
That was not
resource-
declassified because of somebody came through and saw that it had didn't fit.
It happens upon the resource survey, so every 5 to 10 years. We do have recommendations from the consultants. It's in the board's hands where you get to decide. You don't necessarily have to heed the recommendation from the consultant, but we have had recommendations for declassification at that time. Absolutely.
And the board chose that as the course of action?
I would have to go back in the
Okay.
previous resource surveys to see if they actually did. But there have been recommendations from the consultants. I've read about them in reports.
You know, my concern here too, and this is the larger issue, is, you know, Roger was very quick to offer to get out of being contributing, which is what we don't want to do. We want to
Right.
encourage people to list as contributing and add their homes as contributing. And when it is made, in their opinion, onerous, it's, you know, it's difficult to sometimes follow that. And if you're asking somebody to rip off existing facade and replace it with wood, even though it looks almost exactly the same, I think if they appealed, they'd have a very good chance of winning that appeal. So, I mean, I know that's not what we're considering here tonight, but it is part of the bigger picture, and maybe we can talk about it after the meeting. But I didn't hear, Roger, if removing the facade, the front and replacing it with wood, is that an actual proposal, or is that just spitballing? Or, I mean, I know you're not writing the check, so if that's a consideration that the owner has approved, then I'd say let's put it on the table.
So what I would say to you is, to answer the question, I would ask that we clearly define exactly what we're talking about, because what I would ask for is not have to replace the siding that's on the 2-foot portion that we raised. Okay? So we raised the entire roof 2 feet. So that siding is not original, was never original. So, like in the photo that was presented earlier, where it started, you know, at a certain elevation down. So and I would say, if this is the public facade, this is as seen from Palm Square. No other part of the house is viewable from a public right-of-way. There is no alley in the back. There is no alley in the side. So we'd be limited to essentially the panel on the right and the panel on the left from the top of the lower window down, both panels.
But in that, if I can ask a question, because now we're talking about the design, we're going to have mitered corners
Yes.
on the new piece, but the stuff on the upper pieces aren't. Isn't
No.
the contractor just going to be like, why don't we just do that whole side and be done with it? I don't understand the context for that.
We would
This is-
miter the corners exactly
this is
as
fairly
they are now.
Small piece here, but what I was going to suggest is do these 2 side pieces in their entirety, but leave what's inside the porch. That would be, to me, a more reasonable approach than having to patch in AZEC to wood, you know, without mitered corners, with mitered corners. I don't know. That just seems like it'd be a simpler.
I think we would agree with that. I mean, I'm not saying that this is the solution that we would prefer, but if that's where you're going, you know,
That takes off.
he'll be
the
back in a couple of years asking for
section.
repair.
So just to be clear, so we're talking about from this, you know, you're saying you don't want, let's for argument's sake, like from the scalloped top. I know that's not what you had requested. You wanted 2 feet down. So when this was re-sided and raised 15 years ago or whatever it was,
10.
was that 10 years? Was that top part wood or was it AZEC?
No, it was wood.
It was raised. It was re-sided 10 years ago, right?
Yes.
And it was wood.
It was
Most
wood
likely.
from the top of the window down.
What
From the
he's
top of the
ask-
window, what was the
But
addition?
that's new. That's brand new. So there was
But
never
what was the material though?
there was never material there.
So this material that was added on the
Yeah.
approved plans
Yeah.
was spec'd as wood for the new piece.
That's what I'm asking.
Yes.
So we would side from this delineation down.
What Mr. Miller is asking, Roger,
Yeah.
is that the new piece that you added above the windows the siding and the gable pieces, the material that was applied at the time this
10 years
renovation
ago?
was
Yeah.
done 10 years ago was
Assume
wood.
it was wood, sure, of
So
course,
it-
yes.
So
yeah.
it was wood. So it was
Yes.
new wood over old wood, but then a year ago it all became
Yes.
AZAC.
Yes.
Including the gable.
So I mean, if it my opinion, I'm only one vote, but if it was going to be replaced, I would like to see the whole just front facade replaced as wood, top to bottom, from that scalloped part to the bottom, which it's probably about another 25% more of the total.
Including the scallop or not?
No,
No.
How about those side little step outs that are also facing the front, or do you just stop at the very front?
no, just the front, the west facing flat elevation, not including what's inside the porch.
Yeah, I agree.
So I don't have a highlighter, but I would go from that top corner down to the bottom, over to the top, and then up to the top. I mean, it's
So from right here where the mouse is.
there
Yeah, yes,
to
across
the bottom,
yes.
This here.
just that.
Just that, not the wing on the
No,
side.
not the wing,
gable.
nothing, because there's multiple wings on that. And you're
Right.
getting into tearing up too much of the building.
Yeah.
I mean, if it was mine, I'd push back on doing this much, but you know what? If
Just
it
this-
might be cheaper in the long run just to get this done.
This
Can we
face-
say that's a motion?
Well, I think you need to make a motion with that as a
Condition.
condition.
And is the preference for it to be perfectly smooth or with some kind of wood grain in it so that it's,
I feel like if I can weigh in, if that would be okay at this point, unless we could provide some kind of photographic evidence from our file that I haven't found yet that shows it had a wood grain, I would say stick with the plains look.
Okay.
And
Yeah, it
maybe
would
you
match
could,
existing.
maybe you could include some type of, leeway for us to work with the applicant on that it's either planed unless photographic evidence shows a wood grain.
so aesthetically it would look exactly what you're looking at right now.
So, are you going to call that a motion on the table?
Are we all in support of that strategy?
I mean, I'll be happy to make a motion stating that.
Would you second it?
I honestly,
It's going to look exactly the same. It's so much effort for it to look exactly the same. We just know that it's wood, right? Like,
But how much effort would it have been to come to the board and get it?
I know it almost, yeah, exactly that. And I'm in my mind, I'm feeling like it sounds like a little bit of
so this
punishment
is
for it, right?
This is an out. So we could vote and see how it falls. If the vote to approve fails, then the fines continue, and the whole thing goes either to appeal or they can't get a CO. And this way, there is an out. They can do this, and then they get their CO and they move on, and then potentially appeal the fines or whatever.
I'm actually good with either way.
Yeah.
I'm good with either way.
So could you second the motion that John has
Well,
made?
I'll make a motion.
Let's-
I'll make a
let's
clean
have him
motion.
make it,
I'll
yeah.
Make a clean,
Thank
I'll
you.
make a clean motion. So, Mr. Chair, I would like to move approval of the Certificate of Appropriateness 2025-176 for the property located at 49 Palm Square, Marina Historic District, by finding that the request and approval thereof is consistent with the comprehensive plan and meets the criteria set forth in the land development regulations, subject to the following conditions: that the westernmost building front plane of lap-sided siding that is currently Aztec is replaced with natural wood from the scalloped architectural details on the top by the eave down to the ground level, and from north to south only on the front building plane.
Do you want to add to that the suggestion that Roger made, that there be consultation between
And
staff?
yes, and adding to that the level of smoothness or detail or grain of the wood be left to consultations between staff and the applicant.
Are you ready to second that?
Can I add something?
There are others here.
Okay.
Well, somebody make a motion to approve and then we can discuss.
Let's do the
then-
second and then
Or
you
second,
can
I mean,
discuss.
sorry.
Yeah.
Second. Who's second?
I'll second.
Second.
Okay, now we can discuss. Sorry,
Okay.
Michelle?
My suggestion on the first part would be to say excluding the wood siding within the front porch area.
Like to amend my motion to exclude the wood siding within the front screened-in porch area.
And to miter the edges? Or that
I'm
doesn't matter?
gonna leave that up to conversations between staff and the applicant because you're going to two separate materials there. So it might be easier just to butt it, but I don't wanna recommend one way or the other.
So do you amend your second as per
Yes.
this one? Okay. Call the roll?
John Miller,
Yes.
Carol Perez,
Yes.
Vlad Dimitrescu,
Yes.
Chris Cabesis,
Yes.
Peter Dwyer is absent, Jim Chard.
Yes.
Okay.
Shall we go to C?
Yes, and I will go ahead and enter the file into the record. Miss Rebecca Desari is coming out principal planner with the long range division, and she will take over from here. But the file is not on the screen. I don't know the file number. I'm sorry.
Hi, good evening. Rebecca Dassery, Principal Planner. We would like to enter into the record file number 2025-067 and 2025-066. And then we have the agent for our applicant, Mr. Jeff Costello, here to present.
Good evening.
Please introduce yourself.
Jeff Costello, JC Planning Solutions, representing the applicant. Can you help me out?
Okay, so I would suggest using the arrows and mouse. And
Okay.
if and when you want to point, you long press this until it vibrates, and then it'll highlight in a circle. But that's a good button right now.
Yeah.
But you can go forward and backward with that too if you prefer. You know all this.
Yeah. No, I was.
Oh, I thought you said you needed help.
I'm kidding.
I'm like, why does he need
Thank
help?
you.
He does this all the time.
This is taking from your time. of
I
presentation.
apologize. Good evening, board. There, yeah. Thanks. Take care. Jeff Costello, JC Planning Solutions, representing the applicant. Good to see you all this evening. Before you are the comp plan text amendment, as well as the amendment to the land development regulations related to the CF zoning district. You may recall about a year ago, I was before you requesting land use map amendment and rezoning from CF to R1AA, LD, and R1AA to accommodate the adaptive reuse of a single of the existing historic structure to a single-family dwelling. That at the City Commission meeting, that was denied. However, at that meeting, there was direction to, after discussion, amend the text of the comp plan as well as the land development regulations to allow the adaptive reuse of historical places of worship to a single-family dwelling within the CF zoning district. I'm sure you all are aware, or will be. I have this recently. There was amendment to the Live Local Act, which really won't affect this property, but it could other properties that are religious institutions to accommodate housing, regardless of their zoning. So I'm sure. Oh man, let me back up. Let me try this one.
Could I just interrupt you? We did not do ex parte here.
Was it quasi?
It is quasi.
Okay. Okay.
Carol?
Yes, I spoke to Jeff Costello.
No.
I spoke to Jeff Costello.
I also spoke to Jeff Costello.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so, just as that's a separate, but basically, in other properties, residential uses, multifamily could be permitted. In this particular case here, we're very focused on the preservation and the conversion of historic places of worship. And so with this, the comp plan amendment, there are findings in the 245A, feel that the policies within the comp plan support the adaptive reuse of historic structures, and the amendments to the proposed amendments to the historic preservation element and neighborhoods, district, and corridors element support the conversion of historic places of worship to a residential use. I just want to note also that in their backup in your staff reports, there is consistency with, in addition to the two elements mentioned, the housing element as well as the private property rights element. These support preservation of community landmarks such as this, supports adaptive reuse and expands opportunities for adaptive reuse, and provides additional options for the continued use of historic places of worship. And so this was all in your backup. I just had them up there. I'm not going to read through each of the amendments, the objectives, as well as the supporting the objective and the policies. But again, it's supporting the preservation of historic places of worship, and maintain the community benefit of historic places of worship, revered as community landmarks through historic preservation and adaptive reuse. This all supports policies that are already in place. And that's within that historic preservation element, and then again to the neighborhoods, district, and corridors element. These are, again, are in your backup. If there's any question with regard to the language, either myself or Ms. Dassery can answer those questions. This also includes an amendment to the LDR text amendment. The findings can be made in 247A5. The amendment goes a little bit further. There were some clarifications that were included in this as far as the purpose and intent. So there's some clarification on that language. With regard to the principal uses and structures allowed, there was a provision that dealt with the medical arts overlay. Those items were moved into this. And then last but not least, number 13, the primary one, was the single-family detached residence resulting from adaptive reuse of historic places of worship. Other provisions include development standards. As you may be aware, in some zoning districts, they defer, for instance, in the RM, which is, I'm not going to be site-specific, but in this case, let's just say RM, if you construct a single-family residence, it's subject to the R1A requirements. Kind of carried that over into this for consistency. And so on the development matrix, on the screen, it shows what the CF requires versus what the R1A, as far as minimum lot size, minimum lot width, interior and corner lots, minimum square footage of a building, open space, and then the setbacks, of course, are much greater than in the CF. It's 10 feet, pretty much the entire site. Of course, within the R1A, you got a 25-foot front, 15-foot side interior, 10-foot rear, and a 7.5 side interior. And then the building heights are limited to, subject to, obviously, in this case, the steeple would, of course, remain and is allowed to extend per the LDRs. So no changes. Other supplemental district regulations, again, refer back to the single-family detached residence resulting from adaptive reuse of historic places where is subject to the supplemental development standards applicable to single-family detached residents in the R1A. There's also basically the special regulations of the CF, which deal with would not apply to a single-family residence. And then for clarification, it's also definitions were included for the historic place of worship, which is on the screen, and versus a place of worship. So there's a differentiation between the two. This is from the comp plan. Basically shows CF zoning as well as historic places throughout the city. And one may ask, well, where all would this apply? And it is limited within the city. And on the screen, it's approximately 5 properties. And if I'm incorrect, I'm sure Ms. Dossary will correct me, but I believe these are ones where it would be applicable because it's applicable to historic places of worship. There is another property that's on CF, but the historic aspect relates to, let's say, a classroom or a schoolhouse. These are just some conversions examples of adaptive reuse that have occurred. Those in Florida. These were presented at the last year. You're probably familiar with that. In a lot of these situations, we understand the pressures, and we want to be able to accommodate these historic landmarks. These are just in some other states. I did want to just mention too, I know there was a concern also when we were looking at the rezoning in that the possibility of more than one residence on the property. This is very specific to the historic place of worship. In the CF, the single-family residence would only apply to that structure for the adaptive reuse of that structure. In your backup are the other uses allowed in the CF that are residential oriented, community residence, senior housing, assisted living facilities. This is a single-family residence for the adaptive reuse of a historic place of worship. And with that, it concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions. Appreciate your support. Thank you.
Good evening again. My name is Rebecca Dossary, and as Mr. Costello said, this is a comprehensive plan text amendment and an amendment to the land development regulations. You'll have 2 separate actions to vote on at the end, as these are 2 separate actions with 2 separate findings. But because they're so connected, I'm going to present them together as he did. So, Ordinance 825 that you have in your backup is amending the comprehensive plan. There's 2 elements that are proposed for a text amendment: the historic preservation element and the neighborhoods, districts, and corridors element. And then we're proposing through Ordinance 725 the amendment to Section 4421, which has the community facilities zoning regulations in the land development regulations, to add adaptive reuse of historic places of worship as a principal use. So again, as the genesis of this request was the structure here at 200 Southeast 7th Avenue, which is a contributing structure within the Marina Historic District. There's a very extensive history of the district and this property in your staff report, but for here we'll just start again in 2024 when they came in with the land use map amendment and rezoning to try to allow the adaptive reuse, because in community facilities land use and zoning that's not possible. When commission denied it, the applicant was directed to take this route, and that's how they are here before you tonight. So we have several new policies and an objective proposed in 2 different elements and a revision to 1 existing policy. The policies that are proposed in the objectives specifically speak to adaptive reuse and community benefit of historic places of worship and their role as community landmarks. And the policies generally support contextually appropriate adaptive reuse. This particular amendment pertains to adaptive reuse within community facilities, zoning, and land use. But we do have other general policies that we're adopting as well, should it ever become appropriate to look at an adaptive reuse in another zoning district. The general policy is there as well. Then we have in Ordinance 725. Rather extensive number of changes. There were a lot of issues with the construction of this section of the LDR, so when we were adding in the regulations for this amendment to allow for the adaptive reuse of historic structures, we restructured it so that it would make sense. And so when you look at the draft in your packet, you'll see a lot of language that moved around. So essentially we are adding single-family detached residences resulting from adaptive reuse of a historic place of worship as a principal use. The change in the comprehensive plan text amendment allows us to add this in CF zoning. And then we are applying development standards from the R1A zoning district to any adaptive reuse of a historic place of worship. And we are also exempting some of the other special regulations, which really wouldn't be appropriate to a historic structure that already has its place fixed on a parcel of land. And again, we had to also propose these definitions for historic places of worship and places of worship in general, just to make this a fully comprehensive proposal. Comprehensive plan text amendments are subject to the findings in section 311 of the LDR. LDR text amendments are only subject to consistency with the comprehensive plan. So as I'm going through these criteria, you can keep that in mind. Generally for the land use, or the consistency with the land use map designation, by adopting the comprehensive plan text amendment and LDR amendment together, you would find that consistency. And then I'm going to go into some of the policies that apply to this request. So on the screen before you, you'll see where our objective related to the community facility land use designation is, there's an edit for an incorrect name of the district in the policy, but also the policy currently is, the objective is for a wide range of community serving, community-based uses, but we added in the language community benefit because if this specific place of worship was no longer being used as a place of worship, it wouldn't be a community use, but there may still be that benefit from its place in the historical memory of a community. And then we have these other policies. We have multiple policies about adaptive reuse and then amending the LDR where it supports preservation of historic resources. The housing element talks about supporting historic preservation, and then neighborhood character, where historic places of worship may have that that place in the memory of the community, to find ways to continue to preserve those physical structures is supported by the comprehensive plan. And again, in the historic preservation element itself, we have a lot of policies about adaptive reuse and incentives in historic districts, and then compatible adaptive reuse projects. These are a few examples of historic preservation. This one is Delray specific. Dada is very famous, of course, throughout the city for its location central to the city. And then I know Mr. Costello went over a number of examples of adaptive reuse of church structures. So these are just some other ones that have been done throughout the country that maintained the physical form of the structure, even though the use changed. And then again, we have the private property rights element, which supports the right of property owners to use their property. So one thing we would be asking the board to consider is whether this policy change through the LDR and the comprehensive plan is a way to help property owners of these structures to maintain a productive use of their investment. Again, as was noted, this particular amendment to the comp plan and to the LDR would have limited applicability. There aren't a lot of historic places of worship in community facilities zoning, but this proposed amendment, although limited in application, would provide another path for adaptive reuse to add to the historic preservation toolkit. The required findings require a finding of compliance with the LDR. So whether a structure is being used as its original use or another use, if the structure is preserved, we have extensive guidelines in the LDR. Any changes or site modifications have to come to this board. There's the Secretary of the Interior guidelines for rehabilitation, visual compatibility standards, and such. So no matter what happens on a property of historic significance, these are the criteria that they would be subject to when they were proposing any modification. Sorry, I didn't realize all of these red highlights were on here. So one consideration that was not in the amendment or the staff report, but we had talked about whether or not it would be advisable to require that any historic place of worship undergoing an adaptive reuse to a residential use would be required to erect a historical marker. So we would welcome any board input on whether that would be a viable way to contribute to the community benefit, or if this would be an excessive ask. And then finally, just to summarize the considerations again, whether the amendment is consistent with the applicable goals, objectives, and policies of the comprehensive plan, and whether the comprehensive plan text amendment and LDR support the preservation of historic resources. And you'll have 2 sets of actions, and at this time, any questions you have, either Mr. Costello or I can try to address. Thank you.
Comments from the public?
Might as well, I made this trip all the way here. George Long, 46 North Swinton. To me, it looks conceptually correct. And then when we get down to the details, we will have a protection of a historic preservation board. That's all I needed to know to be convinced it's not bad. Good deal.
Okay. From the applicant, any rebuttals?
No, sir.
Okay. The applicant replies, none.
Did you hear?
That's okay. We're good. Staff?
No rebuttals.
Let's take this to the board.
I got a question to start off. So the way say there were modifications proposed down the road, the way a residential property is looked at is different than a commercial or CF property. Landscaping being one. Residential, you don't review landscaping. So are there any other considerations like that that would be removed from review if this switched over to residential or single family residential?
No, but if I may have to call Michelle out here for some of the detailed answers. We weren't proposing any other changes.
No, it would still, as far as
sure.
landscaping, there are requirements for single-family residence landscaping in the code.
Well, they don't come from for HPB though.
No, but however you treat your COA applications for single-family residents would all apply here at the HPB, including 451, the guidelines, Secretary of Interior standards.
Yeah, I mean, other than that, this is kind of a unique situation. I don't like going from CF and losing that, but it can be completely justified in this situation, in my mind, because once that property across the street, which was the parking lot, was sold off, this you cannot use as a community facility anymore for all practical purposes. And as Mr. Long said and noted, if this does remain, in the historic district and a contributing structure, we do have some purview over it, and it will have some historical protection. There's a long history of this. I know most people know, but I'll just say it for the record. This was originally on the Boca Airfield Base. It was constructed there during World War II. After the war, it was moved to Delray. Sam Ogren was one who designed the new facade for it, and the front porch and all that kind of stuff. So it has a long history in Delray Beach, and I'd hate to lose it. So if this actually helps protect it, I'm okay with it, and it really doesn't affect most of the other properties that it could affect. This does affect, or in Delray are parts of larger properties or larger campuses, I should say, that are probably at this point safe. Like Trinity is one little chapel in the middle of their whole property there. So, and same with the other ones. So I'm in support of it.
Vlad?
It's an interesting subject. I actually supported it. I was just thinking, the only thing it seems to me that the setbacks and all that does get modified or maintain the current CF coverage, and all those are meant to stay because the building is existing basically. Whatever things, even they're per se conforming, non-conforming, they are maintained. They're not modified. Is that what correct?
Sure. So the status as a historic structure would be what would determine what happens on the site. So if it's not conforming to any current standard, then whatever is there and has been historically there is how it would stay.
And that would
unless
not,
someone came in and went through the
right,
process.
Well, and linked to that, there's any problem that they have to be brought up to code, meaning, among other things, the worst thing is would be they're going to have to raise the property to the flood level, because this is just one example, but maybe there are others that have that issue, and that has to happen before, trying to figure out, before, is that affecting in any way? If they're gonna be required in some way to bring the building to code, that's what I mean.
So if the building was going to be inhabited, any of the building code regulations for that would have to be adhered to. And then anything regarding elevation and the flood, I know there's different rules that can be applied for historic, so whatever those are would apply to this as well.
So
it is non.
I'm glad to see that Michelle is coming because she's the.
Yeah, it's existing non-conforming in the
correct,
rear.
I understand.
In the rear, it's like a 5-foot setback that could continue to exist through the adaptive reuse.
Okay.
But I'll turn it over to Michelle.
Yeah, no, I was just curious what happened if the building, I mean, this is one of them, but what happened if the building needs to be brought up to code?
So it's
Because is this triggering that or not at all?
this is not.
No.
This is purely use. You don't have a site
Okay.
plan before you. I think maybe you guys said that already. But when it would come through for the actual conversion, that is likely, I would say like a 99% chance, going to trigger the substantial improvement
Right.
requirement for the Florida Building Code. And if the finished floor elevation is not to,
The street.
I don't know if it's 7 or 9 here, I think it's still
No,
9,
9 is 9.
then the whole building has to be elevated, or they can come forward with a variance. And variance to the finished floor elevations is allowed by FEMA. FEMA's, code requirements say that we can do it however we want, keep a list, do a variance. We've chosen through our code that we process it as a variance through the board to leave the building at its finished floor elevation. We've seen them before. So yes, they're going to have to raise anything that's not in compliance, but setbacks would be allowed to continue as non-conformity. They're going to have to provide parking for it, so that, would need to be identified how they're doing that, whether through new structure, driveways, whatever. But that would be a COA that would come through for that. And that would be the case for anything that they would do, whether it was remaining in its site today or without this change, or whether this change happened and they were coming for something else. Like if they said, we want to do a community residence here, and we've got to make improvements, they're going to have to come through for some type of COA for that occupancy and site improvements. So I hope that answers what you were asking.
No, it was just unusual to see that whatever, regulations the CF has, they carried on to the residential use now, which makes sense. I mean, and the other thing too, there's any control about the size of the. I mean, if this would be a cathedral, would that matter? I mean, would that be still applicable to?
So as far as Rebecca could probably speak more to that, but from a site planning perspective, they have to meet a minimum size for a residential unit.
Right.
There isn't really a maximum for the square footage, but there's things like open space and lot coverage and drainage, permeable, impermeable, that they would all have to come through and meet.
Right.
Without having a site plan before you, if you could kind of picture it. I didn't hear if you all drove past the site at all, but it's a church with a grass parking lot to the right of the front door, and then a surface parking lot and additional wing of a building to the left of the front door. So it's a fairly large site, that they would have some room to do something like that.
No, what I meant, if there is any control about what regulation applies to what size building, it doesn't matter. I mean,
not here, no. There's, when you go residential, it's not a FAR, floor area ratio, it's a density. So we're looking at how many units per acre situation. This is single family, it would be one structure per lot.
But if they split the lot and wanted to do something in the parking lot on to the south, and they'd have to meet the visual compatibility standards and that type of thing.
Yeah, and they would also have to meet requirements for lot size. If that's not before you, it's not really a consideration you should be discussing, should it come forward, but in the, let's just talk about it possibly, right? Like what would happen in that case? That would be its own application that would have to come through. They'd have platting to do and meet those minimum lot size with frontage depth.
It just in that consideration, so that's where the use is only allowed in a historic place of worship. So what the previous concerns were with what you're just talking about, it would need to be a CF property, a CF, a use that's allowed in the CF, but not just a detached single family home, because that's not allowed.
You mean like on the adjacent lot?
If based on the conversation.
That would have to be rezoned, all that. Just like bed and breakfasts are only allowed within bona fide historic structures in historic districts. Okay. You couldn't build a brand new building and call it a B&B, and this would be similar to that, where the residence is only permitted within a historic contributing structure that was utilized as a church.
Okay, all right, so it's
actually very
stronger, actually.
Okay, much stronger.
Okay.
Vlad, are you
yeah, I'm
Carol?
Yeah, I mean, the situation's a little different. I mean, I didn't know how many areas were affected, but and that was your slide. Was that your third slide or something that showed like St. Paul's? And so you're talking about just historic places of worship would be affected? Yes.
That's correct. And I think, to the point about it being limited applicability, I think that's why maybe the rezoning had been a more targeted approach than this comp plan and LDR amendment, but there was the concern about just maintaining that land use and zoning, which is why we ended up here today. But you're right, it's very limited because of the number of historic places of worship that are on CF zoned property.
Which, if I could add to that, I haven't studied it, so I don't quite know, but we have seen in instances where you have churches in single family residential zoning districts, and say you had that in a historic district, that's a completely separate thing. You could still convert a church in a single family zoning district to a residence. This is very specific, as Rebecca said, that it's CF. And I think our CFs are First Presbyterian, St. Paul's. We've got a list of them that are in CF. I don't know that we would see First Presbyterian. It's a huge church. But it's the historic portion is the piece in the back, not the entirety of that big church. So there's limited site specifics for each of these structures. St. Paul's is a contributor in OSHAD.
Okay, so I think it is, I'm very familiar with the property. I think it is a shame that it would be lost and not open to the public or be available to the public. And I thought it'd be, it would have been nicer for them to actually move the building someplace else and then, have single-family homes there instead because it is a single-family residential neighborhood basically. But that's just my thoughts. I thought it'd be nice. But those are my comments.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, this came before us last year, right? So I'm trying to remember what we talked about in that one. Maybe I can get a refresher. That was to get it rezoned to residential, and we were very concerned about this, the neighborhood losing the character and losing this community element. Now this is coming back as sort of a workaround to still get the residential, but it's staying as a CF. And yeah, I think you've mentioned it a few times, but what are the main differences again between last time and this time?
The last one was the land use map amendment and rezoning, whereas this is changing what you can do in CF to allow the single family residential use. At the time, I think the board was concerned that this was not going to be something that would be open to the public if it was changed to a residential land use and zoning. But Mr. Costello will have to speak to the likelihood of that and why his client has chosen this path.
Right, and so while there was discussion about community facility, the fact is it's privately owned, and so whether it's this or another use that's permitted in the CF, it is private. As far as the community facility aspect, yeah, I think it tied back to where the association at one time had some meetings there, and of course it was a church. The fact that with this, it's an adaptive reuse, and the community still benefits by the physical asset. The church is there, prominent and visible. I think at that time too, there was also concern that, you could come in and do a lot split and build another house there if you're R1AA, even though it all has to go back through the process. It would need a waiver and all that. And so as we were discussing at City Commission, is like the intent is to have a single family residence. And so at that discussion, while they denied the land use map amendment and rezoning, I did offer the fact about amending the regulations, and the direction was to do so. And so as far as it being open to the public, that somewhat has been lost, and by right they could do other uses that would prevent any other access to the building. So, but the benefit is really what the community sees visibly there. And just like a single family residence in a historic district, not everybody can go walk into somebody's single family home, but they get the benefit in the historic district to see this resource, this valuable resource for generations to come.
So the lot cannot be split now with this?
Under the CF zoning, this only allows a single family residence in a historic place of worship. My client has no intention of splitting it to have another CF use, but that was to alleviate concerns very specific to historic place of worship. There are no plans to split it for another CF use.
Okay, great. And for other clarification, the setbacks, they're still the CF setbacks and they don't change to the residential setbacks?
So for a single family dwelling, for the conversion, they'll be subject to the R1A. So they have more stringent setback requirements. The fact of the matter is the church itself is set back to the portico, or I'm sorry, that's a bad term, for the front porch area. It's about 35 feet. The side setback from the street is about 47 feet from second. To the rear, the nonconformity is the rear. It should be 10. It's currently 5 feet. And then on the side, it meets it's a 10-foot setback requirement. Currently, the building. The intent is not to move anything on that building. So the CF is actually less stringent on the development standards. There's no minimum lot size. It's really a perimeter setback of 10 feet and 48 feet in height. This is more strict.
But I will say, as we're sitting here and the discussion is going on, I don't know that we would be applying any development standards such as setbacks because this is a historic structure. It is where it is. So I think we need to clarify in how we have it constructed which of the R1 standards, probably the ones for accessory uses, for example. Like you can have your pool and you can have your shed in the back, but the things like setbacks, what's there is going to be there. Right. Except if you were to do an addition, then it would be subject to the R1.
Because what I was thinking is to continue with the character that it is now. If they come back with wanting to do additions to the structure, I'd like it to maintain the setting that it is now and not make it look more like a house like the rest of the block. I think it should retain the character, because I think that's the purpose of this, is for this structure to be retained there and retain its setting that's different than houses.
So for in the future, if they come in, when they come in for the conversion, that's the COA. Now the question would be, most likely that paved parking lot will get removed. It's actually a great place for a pool.
I was thinking the exact same thing. That's the next thing we're going to see. Is that pool parking lot's going to turn into a pool. Yeah.
And then perhaps at the northwest corner is like where it backs out on where the alley is, and it's towards the rear, without impacting the existing addition, to have a garage. But again, that wouldn't be subject to all the criteria in 451, the design guidelines, Secretary of Interior standards, and that would be before you all.
Yeah. I do love the idea of the community sign for properties like this. That could be included into the amendment. I think that's what they said, right?
Well, I think I was thinking about that too, a monument sign or something like that communicates this is not open to the public. Please don't come in, but here's a story of it somehow. Because be a lot of people knocking on the door in the middle of the night looking for
right, so
refuge or whatever, and
I think it would be.
We suggested that as
right,
a pre-discussion. I don't think we included it in any of the documents, but I had the same thought. People feel comfortable walking into places of worship, so it would be a really nice thing to have a small little sign out in front near the walkway that expressed that this is a private residence, and then maybe a blip about the history of the church and that it was converted.
That'd be very appropriate. Yeah.
Such and such a year. It would add to the heritage tourism comprehensive plan requirements. This is what we looked at very closely with this exact thing in mind. That should it move forward, it could be something that the applicant puts together. It's not a big deal to have a small little marker out there. Not to the size of what's in the island.
That's what I envisioned, and that's why I was like, no. Because in the historic marker there describes the church in the middle of the roundabout. We can do something more
residential in scale.
That's different. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was what we were thinking. We were not thinking a State of Florida Division of Historical Resources. Blue marker, $3,000. No,
it does raise the question of who pays for it and is it consistent in design.
Well, the owner. This would have to be something the owner would communicate to stop people from walking up to their front door.
Right towards the front, or in this case here.
It's going to have a gate and all that, but we're not there to consider that.
I'm sure they'll be fine paying for a small marker, considering what they're going to pay to do this.
There's also the consistency issue that is it going to be similar to other historic markers in Delray?
I think that's way down the line when we get to that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. For myself here, I think both staff and the applicant have answered the questions I had about setbacks, about splitting the parcel, about the one wing becoming multifamily. So I'm happy with that. The one thing that did come up, I just want to make sure I heard it right. The steeple is not a problem in terms of height.
Correct, and because it's a historic structure, it wouldn't be something we would ever require to be altered anyway.
All right. Who wants to make the motion?
I'll go ahead and do
Two
it.
motions.
Two motions.
Well, yes, but let's do one at a time.
So I think
Definitely.
let me make sure I'm on the right one before we. Sorry. Okay. Mr. Chair, I would like to move recommendation of approval of ordinance number 08-25, a privately initiated amendment to the Always Delray Comprehensive Plan by adopting the text amendment to the historic preservation element and neighborhoods, districts, and corridors element to support adaptive reuse of historic places of worship as a residential use, by finding that the amendment and approval thereof is consistent with the comprehensive plan and meets the criteria set forth in the land development regulations.
Second.
Call the roll. Any discussion? No, right? Okay.
John Miller,
Yes.
Carol Perez,
Yes.
Vlad Dimitrescu,
Yes.
Chris Cabezas,
Yes.
Peter Dwyer is absent, Jim Chart.
Yes. You want to do the second one as well, or do we
Sure, unless
spread
anybody
them
else
out?
wants to. All right.
What?
Oh, there you go. Chris up.
So I move a recommendation of approval of ordinance number 07-25, a privately initiated amendment to section 4.4.21 Community Facilities CF Zone District of the Land Development Regulations to allow adaptive reuse of historic places of worship as a residential use by establishing it as a principal use category and to adopt regulations for the use, and by amending Appendix A, definitions to adopt definitions place of worship and historic places of worship by finding that the amendment and approval thereof is consistent with the comprehensive plan and meets the criteria set forth in land development's regulations.
I second that.
Call the roll.
John Miller,
Yes.
Carol Perez,
Yes.
Vlad Dimitrescu,
Yes.
Chris Cabezas,
Yes.
Peter Dwyer is absent, Jim Chart.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And I want to just thank staff, especially Rebecca and the team for all their help through this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Okay, so our next board meeting is August 6th. We are almost caught up on minutes. We have got, I think, 3, maybe more. What did we get through tonight?
April, I think.
Got to April, so May, June, July, we have
Yep.
3.
Yeah.
I would expect, we want to try to have completely up to date so that we're just month to month. That's our goal. We did reach out to our partner CLGs across the state of Florida to ask about the substitute material because we think that there's an opportunity for further discussion about this at a future meeting. I don't have enough feedback yet to present what's happening. Right now, a lot of them are saying they're getting pressure as well, and they're interested in hearing what research we come up with. So I expect that we might approach this in a future meeting to talk about. There are also some board members who terms are setting, or I don't know, have all of you looked at this, what your term limits are, or if you have to reapply? I feel like it was, Mr. Chard, you're off after August, right? That's
Right.
your last meeting, you're termed out. And I think Mr. Dwyer is hitting a term, at least that's what it says on the website, so I think we need to make sure we let him know to reapply if he wants to be appointed, because he would have to go through that. So if you all could just double check your timing with these things. You'll notice Mr. Craig isn't here. He resigned from the board seeking other appointments. So we have a new board member that likely will be here, possibly be here for our next meeting. But if anyone's term is done in August, and you can be on again for another term, you have to reapply. That's your responsibility to do. They don't just reconsider you. You have to put an application in.
It's a 2-year term?
I feel like it was like 1-year terms and then 2-year terms. I'd have to double check. I think the first was a year. Am I wrong on that?
No,
It's always been 2.
it's always been 2.
Yeah.
Unless you're filling somebody who,
Okay.
abandoned or was removed from a.
I feel like your first term is a year and then the subsequent term is 2 years, but I could be wrong on
And then
that.
you term out after that?
I want to double check.
It says here on the website, so it doesn't list the names like it used to for some reason, at least on the mobile version. So there's 1 current vacancy, 2 terms ending soon, term length 2 years, term limit 2 terms. So
For this board or general?
this board.
Oh, because we're on there. I'll look at it.
Yeah,
but-
here it is, member roster. Sorry.
We'll look at it. Just if you are done in August or you have a term reappointment for August, make sure you apply through the city clerk's application.
No.
Could I expand a little bit on Ezra's resignation? Ezra has a long history of being involved with housing through Goodwill Industry, and apparently there is a need for that experience on the Housing Authority Board, and he was approached on that, and he felt that notwithstanding the fact that he fit in very well with this group, that his main call was to go to housing. He wrote a letter to the mayor asking about that, and he was granted that flexibility.
Yeah, I don't know how that all shook out exactly, if he was appointed or what the final thing was, but I know his goals were housing. So that's good that he'll be in a place where he's probably, ideally suited, although he was a great board member here.
Yep.
Anything for me? Great, music to my ears.
The one thing I would say, Michelle, is you and I have had some communication about in the relatively near term, well, maybe I'm still on the board, to do a tour of Sunday Village.
Oh, I do have an update for you on that.
Okay, and it now has its stone fence up, so it looks fantastic.
Yeah.
Cathcart, yeah.
Cathcart, yeah.
So the board members can reach out to the property owner independently on a one-on-one basis, but we will not be coordinating a group tour for the board. If you do reach out on a one-to-one basis and it happens to be that you're out there at the same time, you would probably want to reschedule that. Otherwise, we're going to have to advertise it as a meeting in the sunshine. I did tour the site yesterday and Friday. We've been doing, getting ready towards CO. It's quite lovely, but they aren't ready. Really, I talked to some of their team. They're not really ready at this point yet to be taking time getting, us toured. Their goal right now is getting tenants moved in, getting a temporary CO, fine-tuning and finalizing the site. They're in major push mode. But it's on the horizon, so they know that some of you may be reaching out, but I would give them some time. We expect that they will be doing a grand opening early fall, so it's right there anyway. Which I expect we would all, be included to go to something like that. But a one-on-one tour is your only option. We won't be coordinating a tour for the board.
I had a conversation with one of the people over there, and so the main building right on Atlantic that's one that's going to be opening first, and people are going to move into. All of the historic structures that we're interested in, the tenants are coming in at different times and requesting different build outs, so that is going to be scattered out. I mean, you could probably know
There's dirt
between
inside.
fall to next summer.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be as long as next summer.
Okay.
They're going to move pretty quick. There's already 2 that are already through the permit process, waiting
great.
for the TCO or CO, whichever they get. Once that's issued, then they can be issued the tenant build out permits. So there's 2 queued up already, but they're dirt inside. One is actually framing is happening inside, so they already have some level of permitting going, but it's not like you could go inside the buildings. It's hot. We were out there yesterday. Some of these buildings are closed. They're hot inside. They're not air conditioned, but the building 123, which is the new building facing West Atlantic Avenue, is quite lovely on the inside, but they still were painting, so they had Visqueen up, and you don't really get the full effect to take it in. So they're almost ready for you guys. I'd say just wait for the grand opening.
Do you know, I mean, you mentioned a while ago that the new tenants, they might want to paint those buildings.
So I've heard from them, the owners, that they really want to maintain the scheme that they've got going right now. But that would be a case-by-case basis if somebody came in for an application. We do know, we review permits for this weekly. So Sunday Village isn't something that staff worked on from 2020 to 2022, and then we were done and it just moved to building permit. We're actively working on their site plan amendments, because things come through that don't go to you, things that do go to you, and then all the permit review is Katharina. And it's constant tweaks and little things happening. So I have a meeting tomorrow with their agent on a separate issue. We meet with them once a month, construction meetings, to go over status, where they're at, any issues we're seeing, fine-tuning the wall. That's why I was out there last week. The wall reconstruction in front of Cathcart House, making sure it's done correctly, that it's their goal to use the highest material, the best material, and then you know, I want them to extend it a little bit longer than it is, as it originally was. So we're
gonna find the boulders for that.
We're hand in hand on this almost every day with them. It's
Any update on the renovation of Sunday House proper?
So they're ready to move to that next. So as soon as, block 69 and 70 are different contractors, where Blue Water was the contractor on the big block. They've got Cast, and I forget the other one. They have separate contractors for those. So those are already starting. You might have noticed some of the road closures. The Blue Water team, as I understand, is going to move to Sunday House next. In fact, I walked Sunday House looking for their project manager, and I happened to walk in there, and I've told them, I'm like, you need to maintain. You got to do some maintenance. And they're like, we're so close to build. And I'm like, you got to get in here and maintain some.
What specifically were you referring to?
I don't want to get into that in the public forum. You know, it's kind of more fine tuning, but this is the level of working together, hand holding. I shouldn't say it like that. We're holding hands as a team, right? Because this has been our approach this whole time with this project, is this is a team approach. It's not an us and them, which is, I think, and they agree, has ensured the success of this thing. So
just a curious question, but that's you might know it because I've never been. Do they actually have a mechanized portion of the garage or not? No, they never did that.
There's no mechanized parking down there. Because it's a big garage.
Yeah,
very big. So it's almost the entire west half of the block. And I was down there. It didn't feel quite as small as some of the garages I've been into. It's one level. You know, it's not two levels, so it's not squished really tight on the ceiling heights.
Sure. No, I remember there was a version when they had the portion of it stacking cars. So
there was on block 69.
Right, that didn't.
Block 69 converted completely. So block 69 had the original approval when it was condominium, had some level of mechanical parking where they would stack two cars. When they revised that plan, that site plan approval, that portion changed completely to a multi-level parking garage. It's a public-private parking garage with some, use liners wrapped around. So 69 is the north portion of the east side of the whole overall project. Like you got Federspiel parking garage, it's immediately south of that.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for
that.
Kelly,
it's a
anything from you?
Good thought.
Any of the board members have anything to bring up?
Great, thank you.
Let's call it a wrap.
Okay, thank you.
So next one's your last.
Last hurrah.
Wow.
An era.
The old gang is being broken up.